Welcome to Dolby Creator Talks. This is a show about how artists use technology to tell their stories, and I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Today we're talking about If I Had Legs, I'd Kick You, the searing and darkly funny motherhood drama from A24, which features a tour de force performance by Rose Byrne. The movie made quite a splash when it premiered at this year's Sundance Film Festival, and it opened last weekend in select theaters. Joining us today are writer-director Mary Bronstein and the movie's supervising sound editor, sound designer, and re-recording mixer, Filipe Messeder. I'm especially excited to talk about this film because it takes such an unconventional and wildly effective approach to sound as a storytelling tool, and it features an incredible Dolby Atmos mix. Here's my conversation with Mary and Filipe. I got the chance to see your movie at the Telluride Film Festival several weeks ago.
Wonderful.
And I knew within 5 minutes that I wanted to have you on the podcast. We had to talk about this completely unusual track that you guys put together on this film, and I'm so happy that this has finally come together and we're able to get you on the podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah. So oftentimes on this podcast, especially when we're talking with writer directors, I like to talk about how they choose to start the movie. You know, that first few minutes, you have so much responsibility. You have to not only introduce the characters and the situations, but you really also kind of have to set the cinematic rules of the road and explain to the audience kind of how you're going to tell this story. So I want to talk about the very first scene in If I Had Legs, I'd Kick You, because I feel like it just so richly sets up how you're going to tell this story. So the scene is a conversation with your main character, Linda. It's with her daughter and a doctor. And the thing that we notice right away is that the entire scene plays out on a pretty extreme close-up of Linda, who is just an amazing performance by Rose Byrne. And so I wanted to talk with you about your decision to start the movie that way, why you chose, to play that entire scene. We never see the other people, why you chose to play the entire scene in a close-up on Linda. And sort of, I'm curious what then the possibilities for sound design that opened up by making that decision.
Absolutely. And I should point out too, the movie is not shot in chronological order, but it just so happened that we shot that opening scene on the first day. That was just a happy scheduling accident. But yes, so I open the film with a close-up, which you think is a pretty tight close-up. But the camera's on a dolly and keeps getting closer and closer and closer until we're right up in her eyeball. And as you said, what I very much was trying to do was tell the viewer, this is the language of the movie. This is what you're going to be experiencing for just under 2 hours. You're going to be in this woman's point of view. You're going to be in this woman's reality. And so what I'm doing is making that in a very literal visual sense. You are practically inside of her head. And that's the going up into the eyeball. And it teaches the viewer how it's shocking, I think. It's a very big swing to open a movie that way. But it, in my mind, pays off because it really does tell the viewer, get ready, because by the end of this movie, you're going to know every pore on this woman's face, every hair on her hairline, everything. And I'm going to make you, in a very radical sense, be cut off from any way to reality test against her reality. So, as you pointed out, we're not seeing the daughter's face. We're not seeing the doctor. We do end up seeing the doctor who I play, by the way.
And you do it very well, by the way. It's a fine performance.
I'm a nicer person than that character. But one of the first lines in the movie, I say off camera, which is perception is reality. And that's a cornerstone of the entire movie, storytelling wise, visually, and sound wise, that we are in this woman's perception. We don't know. We have no way to tell because we don't see her we're never anywhere where she isn't. We don't see her from anyone else's perspective. We don't hear anything she doesn't hear or see anything she doesn't see. So we have no way to reality test against what she's going through. What she's going through is a hell. she's in hell, and she's sort of spiraling down. If you want to go, bring Dante into it, into all the different levels, all the way down. And what that opened up for me, from a visual storytelling perspective, is that I could employ surrealism, I could employ abstraction, and I could employ even experimental filmmaking within how I tell the story. And the close-ups are used throughout. And in fact, on that very first day, Rose was like, she knew, because it's on a script level. It describes, I wrote the script knowing I would direct it. So it's a very visually written script. And as Filipe will talk about, sound is even in the script. And she knew that it would get close. But when it actually got that close, she literally said to me, are you kidding? Is this? And I was like, no, this is what it's going to be. And she's like, okay. And, we were filming on a 35 millimeter camera, and when it's silent in that room, you can hear of the film. And it just sort of lent itself to the feeling of, this is a practical movie. Almost all the effects in the movie are practically done in the room. And using film is just another part of that. It's an object that you can touch and you can hear and you can even smell, And in that very first scene is where we use creative sound design. I don't want to hog it up. I want Filipe, I'm going to throw it to you in 1 second. But one thing that when Filipe and I started talking about it, and he got right away, is the idea that the sounds in this movie should be as heightened as the storytelling. So in that very first scene, we hear birds outside the window, right? But those birds are a little too perfect sounding. They're a little louder than birds might be. And then, in fact, they're the same birds that you hear outside of her window, her therapy office window later. That can't be right. And even if the audience doesn't pick up on it on a conscious level, subconsciously, there's something going on that's uncanny. But Filipe, I want you to talk about that first cue when we're up in her eyeball.
Yeah, well, so, just when I read the script and it opens with this incredible scene, there was so much description of Linda, of Rose, and what she's feeling inside. And when Mary and I sat down to just watch some scenes and watch a rough cut that we had, it became immediately apparent to us that we were inside of Linda's head. And so when we started playing around with the very first turnover and just thinking about how things should sound, actually the very first thing we did, instead of starting to lay down sound, was to start panning around the voices, was to put her in the center, and was to just localize the entire film as swirling around her. That was one of our very first conversations before I had even seen the film, and it became immediately apparent to me that this was the language of the film. Mary had showed me kind of a pitch deck, amazing SketchUp of how the film would be, and a big part of that was the sound. We would be experiencing the world before Linda even notices it, right? We're the film is coming at us in a way that it's more like a hear, don't show, right? And so placing her right in front, and her daughter, to our left, and her doctor to our right, immediately throws you into this language. We're, like Mary said, we're telling the audience that you're not in for your standard film ride. You're experiencing this. You're not watching this.
That's exactly right. And I got to say, that's what excited me from that very first scene, because of course, I'm attuned to this, so I think about it. But from that very first moment when I realized, like, oh, only Linda's dialogue is coming out of the center channel. The other people, you're pinning them to other spaces, other points in the space, and that's an element that recurs throughout the film. We get voices coming in from all around us, which, Filipe, that is something that is not traditionally done in film mixing. So immediately I thought, oh, this is going to be really interesting. These people are doing something really interesting and distinctive in the way they're handling the sound. So I just thought it was really, it's a bold choice. Mary, you I think you've referred to it as a big swing at it, but I think it completely paid off.
Yeah. And I think like there's some movies, that and I'm not saying this in a derogatory way, but there's some movies that you consume, and then there's some movies that you experience. And from the very beginning, the conversations I had with all my department heads, and certainly with Filipe when we were in the sound mix, was this is an experiential film. This is a film that I want people to be totally, when they're sitting in their movie seat, they are engulfed by the emotions that Linda's having, and by the things that she's seeing and the things that she's hearing. And, I'm not a sound designer. I'm not a sound technician. But having the expertise of Filipe and Rui Garcia, also, telling me that there are these tools that we can use. We can do things like we can separate out the voices. We can have it so that if Linda is hearing something behind her, that we hear it behind her. Or if with the roof collapse, for example, that is happening above us visually, we can hear it above us if we're in the theater.
Oh. I came down.
Hey, yeah, we just got home, and you would not believe.
And those are things that I I came to the table without knowledge of. And once they opened those possibilities up to me, I would say that being in the sound mix was one of the most fun parts of making the movie. It was like a playground. It felt like it was hard work, but it was like playing. It was experimenting. I'll never forget the day that I've said this before to Filipe, and he always laughs, but the day that he said that he got a hurdy-gurdy, I was like, oh man, I was like, I don't know what you're going to do with the hurdy-gurdy, but I am so excited about this. And just the idea that this movie also, I should point out to people listening and watching, does not have a score in a traditional sense. In that what functions as a score is all sound design and soundscape, and that was something that happened. I knew I didn't want to score, but you kind of have to go through the process of, all movies have scores. So let's try to find the right kind of score. And it never, ever, ever was right. And I finally said, this movie does not have a score. It's all sound design. And one of my biggest influences for that was the movie Eraserhead. And I think that the way that we ended up working really ended up being in that tradition where you have, David Lynch creating sounds by putting a microphone in a bathtub and swirling a toy boat around it, and creating a sound that you don't even know what that sound is, where it comes from or how it was created. But it becomes part of the film in a way that, of course, that's the sound that is happening.
It's so interesting to me that you invoke that. And of course, that was a legendary collaboration between David Lynch and his longtime sound designer, Alan Splett, who was just a master of the form. But like that movie, your movie uses sound as a very, sometimes a very blunt tool to heighten tension and to create this very uncomfortable feeling. And I love the way you talk about your film as being, an experiential kind of a cinematic presentation, because, I've seen the movie twice now in theaters with an audience. And the reactions are just all over the map. There's great nervous laughter.
Yes.
People need to release that tension.
Yes.
And then we'll get into this, but there's, a moment later in the film where the feeding tube is being removed. And I was sitting next to a friend of mine who is a producer who has made some movies that you have definitely seen.
Okay.
And I realized out of the corner of my eye that he had his hands over his ears. Like it was just too much.
Seen this too.
Yes.
It's just, I'm so, it must be such a treat for you to watch how people are responding to the film.
It is. It really is, because there's also very early on in the film, and this goes to some of the humor or tension, really. To me, there's two ways while watching a movie that your body can release tension, or that the filmmaker can use those ways as a tool. And one is crying and one is laughing, right? And I give both of those opportunities in this film. And I think it depends on who you are and what you're coming into the movie seat with, how humorous you're going to find the moments that I intend to be humorous or not. And I've had my hard laughers, and I've had my nervous, like, should I be laughing at this or not? And there's also people that don't, the humor doesn't land for them at all, and it's still a satisfying experience. And that's a tightrope that I walked very carefully. But the sound has a lot to do with that. Early on in the film, there's a part where she's got this one moment where she's like, the child's in the bathroom. I have one moment to myself, and she starts stuffing cheese in her mouth. And Filipe, I don't know if you want to talk about what the sound with that, but I've had people be like, people laugh at that scene, but then it's so disgusting. I was like, I want Filipe, I want to make this and any other food that is be as disgusting as possible.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's an interesting moment also, because that was actually one of our first, besides the score cue that comes in right, when we're in the doctor's office, that is also a moment where we play with our perspective a lot. We drop out almost all the sound, and all you're hearing is her chewing. You're really going into Linda's head here. And it's one of the only moments of the film, other than when she returns to her house later on, where we actually drop the sound. It's when you're really inside Linda's head where we give you that break, and then the rest of her hell comes rushing right back in. So that was, and that moment, finding the sound of that moment was a big part in finding the language of the film. When we talk about Alan Splett and David Lynch, a lot of their work was devised in rhythm and in like the repetitive nature of a lot of the beautiful background work that Alan Splett did. And when I first watched the full cut of this film, what it was giving me was so many beats and rhythms, right? This film has almost like a metronome going throughout it the entire time, in the baby monitor, but also in her breathing exercises and the constant wave crashing that we hear when we're outside of the motel and eventually at the beach. All of these rhythms, we really played into it. That was our, part of our first conversation. Wherever the baby monitor drops off, something else will pick it up to continue that tempo, that metronome.
I see what you're saying, because when she has that baby monitor, we're getting there's a rhythm to the machine, the pump device that the daughter is hooked up to. That's fascinating. Yeah, I'm intrigued by this because, of course, I noticed right away that there's no score, not a traditionalist, so you're using sound design as score. But Mary, I'm kind of curious for you about, like, that's such a courageous decision, and you just mentioned that, I can only imagine that you might have had some pushback from some producers maybe about like, what are you talking about? You're not going to have. So you did actually experiment with it, but you came back to this core idea.
I came back to this core idea. I went into it knowing that I didn't really want score in a traditional way, because my feeling about score, I'm not against score, but my feeling about score is that what it's meant to do is give an extra ingredient for the audience to understand what's happening emotionally in the scene, or to give an extra ingredient for that emotion to occur. And what I felt like was between the close-ups and how heightened and raw and visceral the performances are, it's almost like a glass of water that's filled up to the top. If you put the score in, no matter what we tried to do, it would overflow, and it's too much, and it's hitting you on the head too much. Like, this is a dramatic moment, this is a tense moment, and so it just didn't work. And it's with a film, you fight a lot of battles to win the war, and that was a little bit of a battle. And thank goodness I was able to win that one. And I think once we were able to demonstrate what we were doing, they totally got it. Everybody got it and was on board.
And also, quite frankly, Rose Byrne doesn't need the help.
That's what I mean. And so by using sound design, it's not so much what a score does, as I described, but it's world building. It's building the world that she lives in, and some of it is in her head. So I always think of the cues that come in, and when you see it in a theater, Glenn, when you see it in a theater, some of those cues are making your chest bones rumble. In a quite a literal way. It's happening to you, and in the same way that it's happening to her. It's making it's the ground under your feet feel like it's rumbling if you're in a theater with the right sound system. And so it's taking her inner world and it's externalizing it for the viewer. And then it's also just building out her world. For example, when we do sound checks, and I was so nervous the first time I had to do a sound check where Filipe wasn't going to be there. And I was like, what do I do? How do I know? And I don't know numbers and dials and these things. And we have some touchstones that we do. And one of them, he told me, is to stay until the first scene in her office. And if you can hear the clock, you know that it's loud enough. Because the clock in her office is louder than a regular clock would be. And it's the way that she is hearing the clock, because she wants to get the hell out of there. She wants the session over. She wants to get the hell out of there, even though you cannot hear the clock in her therapist's office, because she wants that time to be extended. And she does not want that time to be over. So that was one of the first things that we played with. And also, like, just the amount of conversations, talk about nitty gritty, technical discussions. How loud is too loud with the clock? When does it become silly? When is it right? When is it low? But as far as a sound check, it's that when the ceiling crashes, it should make people jump, and they do. And the clock ticking should be heard. Like it should be up front. And also for me, the birds outside the window. And those are things that, since I don't know about numbers and dials, Filipe, spelled out for me, and that's what I use. So I always, as soon as I can't stay in a theater watching my own work. I find it too stressful because, as you're saying, there's so many reactions that people are having. And if I feel that the room is not giving a reaction that I think should be there,
that's excruciating.
It's excruciating. It'd be like a stand-up telling a joke and there's crickets. You just want to run away. And so, but I do always stay for the clock if I don't have the opportunity to do a sound check beforehand. But if I do, those are the parts that we. And the other part is if I do a sound check beforehand, they'll play also the part where the light beam comes out of the hole in the ceiling, which should also make you jump. And even when I'm doing a sound check, it still makes me jump. Then I know that it's loud enough. But I've had some sneaky, people in booths. We say, this is what it is, and then they turn it down. And I remember Filipe at one point, at one screening, I forget what it was, ran up to the booth and was like, turn it back up.
Yeah, that was our Sundance screening. I was like sitting kind of in the middle row, and I had to like, crawl over like so many people and like sprint to the back.
I think that because people aren't used to, I think, Glenn, to your point, people aren't used to sound in this way, and us wanting to get these bodily reactions from sound. And so they're like, oh, if it's always at this number, they didn't really mean for it to be at that number. Let me put it back down. No, we meant it. We mean it.
It becomes like we start to chase our tail around because the projectionists know that, oh, they mix hot because they think it's going to be too low. So we're going to, it just becomes a mess. But Filipe, I'm just curious for you as a sound designer, was this your dream to have the opportunity to work on a film where it's all on you and there's no score to work against, or was it kind of terrifying, or was it both?
It was a little of both. It's always a dream to be able to carry a film, and especially when it's written for sound. I mean, when I first read the script, I told the people that sent it to me that I have to speak to Mary within the first 5 pages, because I heard it through like just right then and there. And then I went back and finished it, but like immediately I was like, we have to talk to her. It's always a dream to be able to carry a sound film, but it was terrifying when we made a decision to do it, because it was not in the plans. And certainly I had to kind of change gears and start thinking about things in a different way. I had never composed a film before, and it was a big ask. As Mary was saying, we had started with score and we had started with many different iterations of it. And so me and my team, we started designing these more abstract cues to elevate the score, to always be a bed underneath it, because we were changing pieces a lot, and we always had to have something there to support the music. It was then in our first temp where it was like a 2-day session where we came in because we needed to make something for A24, and Mary turned to me and said, "Can you just mute the music here?" And when I did, that exposed the kind of like underlying sound design score bit that I had written to go, like underneath the music. And she said, "Okay, turn that up. That's it. That's the score. That's the score of the film right there." And so, I had a pit in my stomach, and like my heart just sank, because I was like, okay, we have to develop this. We have to make this into actually something, because it was not necessarily anything in that moment.
Well, so I want to dig in on that a little bit. What actually are you doing? Like you've mentioned using, occurring elements in the spaces to provide a rhythmic element, but so I presume that you're using tones. You're like, how are you kind of getting to the same point that a score might, but you're using sound design elements?
Well, this all started with the very first thing that Mary and I did was Lucian Johnson and Mary's, Lucian was the film's editor. They sent me the very first, a little snippet of the film, which was the scene of the light beam shining through the hole. That was for like an audience test screening months before we had started. And they had asked me to come up with something. It was not necessarily supposed to be a jump scare or not. It was just, we don't really have, we just need like some 3 options here. And one of the options that I came up with was, besides it being just like a big hit, which was kind of like the obvious, was this like accompanying like heavenly light, like tone that just comes out of it. And Mary loved that and took that to the test grading. So when we started to think about the score, I immediately went back to that one tone that we had created. And yes, that was many different recordings of a hurdy-gurdy and other, like, just other tonal sounds. And so I just kept thinking about that sound and how can we stretch it and how can we modulate it. So I work a lot with Reason, making like synthesizer patches, and so feeding that sound back into Reason and then creating a patch where I can modulate the sound became kind of like that was our palette to work with for the score. And then we just started together. We had a lot of sessions where Mary was sitting on the couch here in the studio, and we would just score the film together. We would say, look, what if it goes up here and goes down here? What if we introduce a new element? So we started harmonizing on top of that, and suddenly we were writing music. It came out of the sound design as like a sound effect in a way, but it quickly became score that was exactly coming out of the language of the film.
You use this to heighten these moments of kind of emotional tension. And I'm thinking about there's a really wonderful scene, Mary, that you have with Linda it's in a therapy session that she has with Carolyn Prim.
Yes.
And who's a very distraught mother who is very concerned about the welfare of her own child. And Linda kind of drops into this moment of real clarity and gives Carolyn this advice that I feel like she herself needs to hear. And it's just a wonderful moment. And I noticed the second time I saw it, like, oh, there's a tone that's ramping up here. There's something Filipe, you're working very subtly to kind of, to shore up this very important moment. And I thought it was just a beautiful, very subtle way to do that. Yeah.
I mean, from a writing perspective, that's exactly, you totally get it. She kind of leans forward instead of the camera coming towards her, which usually is what is happening, she leans into the camera and she kind of leans out of the light and it becomes very shadowy. And it goes into a daze in her eyes where she's very much speaking to herself. And then she kind of snaps right back out of it. And, it's effective on Rose's performance is impeccable in that moment and is completely effective, if you had no sound design. But that is one moment where, sound design it's an example where it brings it all together, because then we can have this zoning in sound, and that is something that you can only really do with sound. And then the transition, out of that scene into the next scene where she's listening to a YouTube video, is a ramp up to where it ramps up so big that you think it's going to pop, and the pop is the cut. And that was something that we worked on quite a bit, Filipe, right? Of calibrating that. But it was one of the most exciting things, because it was like, I feel like in that scene and how it transitioned to the next scene, off of the sound, is the language of sound in the movie and how it relates to cutting. We do that a few more times where there's like a ramp up and then it's like a rubber band snapping. And the snap is the film cut, is the cut to the next scene. And it's so, the other one where that happens, I think is where, for me, where Linda is on the couch crying, a tear comes out of her eye, and she's saying, I just want someone to tell me what to do. And her lip is quivering. It's a very quiet moment. But then under that, you start hearing this rumbling cut. Oh, we're in a car and the fucking hamster's in the car. and then the sound in that scene is could probably be a whole other episode of your podcast, uh but we do that a few times, and when I would see it, the work fully in there, and watch it back, so magical for me, because again, it's just the difference between the layering of these sounds and tones that are all cyclical in the movie. They refer to other sounds, and they refer to other parts that are coming in the future, or whatever, and it is in lockstep with the way that I think my script is, which is also cyclical, in that people say dialogue to other people that then they say to somebody else, and somebody else says that same thing to somebody else, and then we have, of course, the theme of the circles, and it just all was so magical. But that cue that you're talking about, yeah, Filipe, that took a little bit to get right. But when we got it right, it was like a magic moment, I remember.
Yeah. Well, one thing that, an approach that we took that I was really grateful for was we were trying not to like paste our score, our sound design score on top of what was happening. It always, if you listen to the soundtrack of the film, it always comes out of something that is currently happening. So like the rhythm and tempo of her dissociation right then in that moment is the tempo of the clock that you kind of lean on. So she leans in, the backgrounds drop a bit, you start hearing the clock a lot more, and then the bass kicks in with that same tempo. Just like also like in that scene where she's crying on the couch, what is making her lip quiver, right, is this piece of score, but it's actually just the engine rumbling of the car of the next scene.
I
right?
see.
So,
You're pre-lapping the car engine from the hamster scene under the genius. That's just
exactly. So it's like we want it to be like this earthquake that's like quivering her lip, and you don't know what it is, and maybe there's another score cue coming, but it's just the car in the next scene. And then when we are into the scene, the mix kind of balances out again. We wanted everything to be coming out of what Linda's experiencing.
That's really fascinating. So, Mary, I'm kind of curious for you, since this is such a sound forward film.
Yeah.
I'm curious. So I would say traditionally, in most filmmaking, picture leads the sound. And maybe, Filipe, this is what you were talking about a little bit, but I'm curious, were there times when the sound concept influenced the way you shot a scene, or certainly the way you edited a scene together, or maybe even production design? Because it seems like you were really thinking about sound even as far back as when you were writing the script.
I was thinking about sound all the way back when I was writing it. For me, the ocean was something where the sound of what an ocean sounds like exists. We know what an ocean sounds like. We know what it sounds like when we're close to it. We know what it sounds like when we're in a town that's adjacent to an ocean and we're a little bit far away from it, but it's still there. And we know what it sounds like when we're in the ocean. And those are three different ways to, and we know what it sounds like when there are violent waves crashing. We know what those things sound like. And so those are sounds that exist, that you don't, we don't need to invent. They're not abstract. But what we ended up doing with them, what Filipe ended up doing with them, is abstract them to the point where what I wanted was the ocean to be ever present. It's a theme in the film that comes up in a dialogue way. And I wanted to shoot. We did end up being able to shoot in a practical location where the beach was actually behind the motel that we shot at. So it was practical in that sense. And I wanted that because I wanted, even when the actors were on set, that you're hearing that in the background. And then we have the actual sound, that's being picked up on set. and then we can use that. I knew that I wanted to use that later in sound design to in some way that would heighten it, but I didn't know what it was. But so that's an example of sound sort of leading an idea. I knew that when Linda is running into the ocean, and the universe smiled upon me that night, because I will tell you that every other night that we were shooting on Montauk, I was psychotically, I was just consumed by what we had one night to do that. And you can't control the ocean, and you can't know what waves you're going to get. And I would go out with my flashlight and look, and it was as calm as anything every night. I swear to God. And I would be
the scene is not going to work if the ocean is calm.
Freaking out. I was freaking out. And then that night it was so violent that it was almost like, oh my God, is this too dangerous to do? But what I wanted, I knew, is that I wanted the ocean to be ever present, so that when we actually have our character literally meeting with the ocean, literally smacking against the ocean, that there's a satisfaction there. Philippe, you can speak to what you did, but, it's I've been told by the audience, and this is what our intention was, is that it feels like you're being smacked in the face by the power of the ocean. That's what I wanted conceptually it to feel like. And I think we achieved that with sound.
Well, you and I spent about 2 days working on just that scene alone. So it was a big focus of ours. And so was keeping the ocean alive throughout the whole film. Anytime we're anywhere near it, we want to hear it. What I really appreciated about you and Luke's approach to this was that you were very open to changing the edits if we needed to for sound. There were actually a couple of moments in those big, rubber band snap moments where we did play with where exactly would the cut go, right? So then I would temp in what I felt like was the natural resolving of the rhythm, and then Luke would go back in and actually change the edit to match that. Another version of that was when we finally dialed in what the correct breathing tempo for the exercises was. You and Chris Messina, the DP, actually went in and reshot some of the more abstract, like whole, like dream sequence aberrations to match with the sound that we had created.
We then went back and recalibrated the pulsing of those things to match the correct rhythm. And also, I actually went back and redid the breath rhythm. So in some parts, I won't give away which parts, but in some parts, it's my breathing instead of Rose's, because I'm in the sound mix, and we're saying it feels like it needs to be a little bit more like this. And Filipe is actually directing me of the tempo. And those are moments where sound ended up dictating picture decisions.
Well, there's so much that we could talk about, and Mary, you're absolutely right. We could do an hour just on the hamster sequence.
On the hamster.
But we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that. That's the simple, obvious choice. But I cannot let you go. I have to talk to you about the baby monitor.
Yes.
Oh my God. So, the second time I saw the movie, I knew that we were going to talk. So I had my notebook with me and I was taking notes, and I just want to write, here's what I wrote down in my notebook in the dark while I was watching the movie. Sound design, baby monitor, motel ambiances, medical equipment, voices, ?
Yeah.
The baby monitor distorts and picks up other sounds. It's making me so tense. Was what I wrote in my notebook.
Tense. It's supposed to make you tense.
Good.
The idea, and this is on a script level, and maybe what Filipe is talking about what he first reacted to, because it might be one of the first sounds that I mentioned in the script, is that she has this idea that it's safe for her to leave the motel room because she has this baby monitor, this tether. But at the same time that it makes her safe, it's also like, I can't get away because I have this ball and chain machine. Those people that have children might know what a real baby monitor sounds like. This does not sound like a real baby monitor, and I never wanted it to. I wanted it to sound like we have the of the machine, how that sounds, and then we have a lot of static that's loud. She has it turned up all the way. And then there's some sleepy sounds of the child rustling and rolling over and sighing in her sleep. And then that's all a cacophony of hell for Linda. But Filipe, you can talk about how those are my ideas of the sounds, and then it was abstracted.
You did sneak in some other stuff in there, didn't you? Or did I just make that up?
There's a lot of modulation going on in the baby monitor because we're playing along with just her distance to the room itself. There are a lot of voices in the motel, and including our neighbor who is listening to a continuous baseball game all night long.
End. Yeah.
And you do hear all these different abstract weirdness coming through. But the main focus here was focusing on the rhythm of the feeding tube. And that was one of our main focuses in the beginning, is what does this thing sound like and what is the rhythm of it? Actually you had a really great rhythm to start with the practical one, and we just elaborated on it and made it as kind of chaotic as it could be. I mean, how could you possibly sleep through that thing? But so then really playing up this anxiety of the machine through the baby monitor wherever she went was that was a big focus of ours, and done through many different layers of speakerphone plugins and many different other static and distortion plugins as well. One of my actually favorite moments in the film, for as far as our mix goes, is actually when she comes back into the room and she turns off the monitor, and then you hear it finally cleanly, it just picks right back up. She can never get away from it.
What it actually sounds like. Yeah. And then I'll add too about the baseball game. That is also an idea that came in the sound mix, because there was a moment where we thought it's too, we have the oceans and we can have some crickets, but it sounds there needs to be one added element when they're in that hallway, that exterior hallway that just is something else going on to just be a little chaotic. And that was something that was not in the script. That was not an idea that came in, there were different things that we thought of, and I forget who said it, but what if the guy's listening to a baseball game in the corner? And I had a friend just read copy of an old baseball transcript, and we put it in there. And this thing, anytime you're outside the room, is this baseball game never ends. I don't know how I notice it, but it's there, and it just adds to the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's this idea of the indifference, right, of the world around her, right? It's the game that's going on. It's the spa music that's outside her office. All of these things going on are completely indifferent to this chaos that is going on inside of her, but they're all mounting on top of each other.
Well, we're coming towards the end of our time, but one of the things that I just was so struck by your film, it's not often that we hear Dolby Atmos used in this kind of way, certainly for lower budget, independent films. I think that a lot of people still think I still have conversations with directors about why do I need Atmos? I'm just making a dialogue movie. I don't have big action sequences. And to me, your film is just a great example of anytime you want to give the audience a sense of a space and take them on a journey.
Yes.
Dolby Atmos is a great tool. So Mary, it's your first time. You've never worked with Atmos before. What did you take away from it? And what would you say to a director who says, do I need this Dolby Atmos thing?
I think it's essential if you are, I can only speak to someone who has only made art films or something that would be categorized as an art film. where the creative struggle is at the center of it, not a commercial one. So I can only speak to that. And I would say that if you're trying to create something where the audience feels completely immersed in your idea or in what's going on the screen, it's like the greatest tool, because as we were talking about in those moments where we're up in the ceiling in that liminal space, that abstract space, and we have the soundscapes swirling around us, I can have that visually, and I do have that visually. But then if the sound was just static in front, that's a very different experience than feeling like you are actually swirling around in that space that has no beginning or end. And I think when it was explained to me what Atmos was, I was so excited about it. So the ceiling falls in and we can hear it from above us, as if the ceiling of the theater is actually falling in. How incredible. It's another tool in the toolbox, just like all these other tools that we have. And for me, I would say it'd be a shame if it was just used on big budget action films. The use of it in art films, I think there's tremendous experimentation and playing that can be done there that's so effective.
Well, I mentioned I saw the film twice. I knew I wanted to hear the Atmos mix, so there was a screening at the Academy in Beverly Hills at the Samuel Goldwyn Theater, which is just one of my favorite movie theaters in the world. It's a great place to watch movies. So that's where I saw it last weekend, and there were a lot of folks there. And one of the guys that I was talking with afterwards is I'll just say he has 2 Academy Awards for sound, so he knows what he's listening to.
Legit.
And as he was raving about the film as we were walking out, he said to me, "I hope someday I get a chance to mix a movie like this."
Filipe, so, how does that make you feel?
Well, humbled.
So what you've done is really remarkable. It's really, it's treating sound as a storytelling tool on a whole different level. And my hat's off to you. I'm so excited that you guys were able to make the time and come on the Dolby podcast and talk with us today, because I wasn't kidding. Like 5 minutes into the first time, I was like, I have to talk with these people about this movie.
Yay. We did it, Filipe. Yeah. We did it. I love that.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Glenn,
thank you so much
us.
for having us on.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Many thanks to Mary and Filipe for joining us on the podcast today. And an extra special thanks to our friends at A24 for helping us put this conversation together. Be sure to check out If I Had Legs, I'd Kick You. It is now playing in select theaters and will be in wider release starting October 24th. We'll have links, as always, in our show notes. And of course, if you have the opportunity, go see it in Dolby Atmos. If you'd like even more conversations with artists and filmmakers about how they use technology to tell their stories, be sure you are subscribed to Dolby Creator Talks. You can find links to our show on all the major podcasting platforms, including the video version on YouTube, in our show notes. Or you can simply search for Dolby wherever you get your podcasts. If you're curious to know more about what we do at Dolby Creator Lab, head on over to dolbycreatorlab.com. There you'll find information about all of our programs. You can access the entire library of episodes of the show, and you can sign up for our mailing list. Until next time, this is Dolby Creator Talks. I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Our producer and editor is Michael Coleman. Our executive producers are Amanda Schneider and Jack Ferry, with additional editing by Matt Nixon. And our production coordinator is Karen Marroquin. Thanks for joining us.